Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this installment of Epic Insight. This is Chris Colangelo, Manager of Marketing and Communications here at Epic Retirement Plan Services, and I'll be your host for today's session, Understanding 316 Services. There's a bit of confusion in the marketplace around what people are calling 316 services and the types and levels of service they include. So to clear up some of the noise and confusion, we have Dick Billings with us here today. Dick is a Principal and Director of Marketing for Fiduciary Wise. He's an ASPA certified pension consultant and is enrolled practice for the IRS. Dick started and ran his own certified TPA firm for 35 years and is a registered fiduciary. He has served as an expert witness on retirement plans, writes nationally published articles, and serves as a committee member for ASPA's Plan Consultant magazine. Just a quick reminder before we get going that your line will be muted throughout today's call, but if you have any questions you would like us to address at the end of the session, please enter them in the webinar control panel. You will also see a handout in the control panel that Dick has provided, which can be downloaded at any time during today's session. And with that, I will turn it over to the expert, Dick Billings.
All right. Great. Thank you. Great, Chris. Good evening or afternoon, everybody. My name is Dick Billings, and I first of all apologize. I'm not sure why my name is writing over services, but anyway, as you can tell from my introduction, I ran a TPA firm for 35 years, so I learned technology. When I started, it was, it wasn't Windows, and it was ASCII, and it was manual IBM machines and so forth, so I've had to learn. So I apologize for if there's any of these technical glitches that come on there, but I appreciate the opportunity to be on here. Now, if you've been around any length of time here in the retirement plan business, the issue or the question or the discussion of a fiduciary, an outside fiduciary, has become popular, but it's still relatively new. And so the question becomes now as you're out talking, especially to investment advisors, okay, who are speaking maybe or acting on behalf of plan sponsors, is understanding what different ones are. And since you guys are in the administrative business, you need to be more familiar with what 316 does and what 316 doesn't do. Now, a little background about my firm, which I won't spend a lot of time, but it'll help in terms of context as we go through this in the half hour that we have here. Fiduciary Wise is what we would call a professional fiduciary. That's all we do. We don't do TPA stuff. We don't serve as an investment advisor. We're not a trustee. We don't do any of that. We serve as the typically named fiduciary, and I'll explain more of that in a moment, the named fiduciary for about 700 retirement plans around the country. Our main office is in Arizona. I actually am a partner, but I live in Arizona. I sold my administrative TPA firm early this year in January, but I've been a partner with Fiduciary Wise since last August and know the founder, Don Jones, who started Fiduciary Wise in 2012 for 25 years, and of course worked with him as a contractor. So I'm very familiar with what they do, and the idea is with employers today, who back in the day before Al Gore invented the internet, before even 401k existed in the Internal Revenue Code, and before all these things that we have today in terms of participant direction of investments, the job of a fiduciary in terms of a plan sponsor wasn't that onerous. They put money in once a year. It's a profit sharing plan, let's just say. They gave them the participant statements once a year, and that was it. File the IRS return. Well, retirement plans are much more complex today. And so the question becomes, when you have an employer who makes widgets, how interested are they in knowing what's going in their retirement plan? And the answer is generally no. In my own case, I had 20 employees and we had a 401k. I was my own worst customer because when you're asking me to talk about my 401k, you're taking time away from me making widgets and so forth. So the idea here is to take some level, and it varies, some level of fiduciary risk away from the employer. Now, in case you're not familiar with how our laws work in this country, is that when Congress passes a bill, even, Obamacare, for example, even though it was 10,000 pages or whatever it was simply a statute. It's a general description of what it is Congress wants to happen. Then it goes to the regulatory bodies, the Department of Labor, the IRS, Health and Human Services, whatever the bureaucracies are in our country that are appropriate, to then define in more detail what things are. ERISA created 316. That's a ERISA section. Okay, and this is all it says in the statute, or excuse me, in the statute from ERISA, which was passed in 1974. It's 45 years old this year. This language here has not changed in those 45 years. So what is an administrator under 316? Well, the person specifically so designated by the terms of the instrument under which the plan is operated. Now, typically that's an adoption agreement or plan document, but it could be other things. And number two, which is much more important, if an administrator is not so designated, it's the plan sponsor. So think of any of your clients who are the plan sponsor. 99% of the time, there is no person specifically designated to administer the plan. Now, the plan sponsor might say, "Oh, well, Epic, my TPA, they do the administration." Well, they do some administration, but they may not be the 316, and they probably clearly are not the capital administrator, and that's what it mentions here at the bottom. Different plan documents, and this is important as well. When you look at a Relias plan document as the author, or F.T. Williams, or the ABC law firm, or whatever, and I used to write plan documents years and years ago before prototypes became more cost effective. You can write a plan document any way you want, as long as it has the list of required modifications that the IRS requires. So in most plans, you will see the term capital plan, capital administrator. You may not. But ERISA says you have to have at least one main person, whether it's called a plan administrator, capital P, capital A, plan administrator or not, you have to have at least one person. And we're going to talk about that here in the next slide or two. But the first thing to remember is when you see documents, if you have a little p and a little a versus a big P and a little a, they mean something different. Plan administrator in the capitalization term is a defined term in the Internal Revenue Code. So, in a more general layman's term, what does a 316 do? Okay, well, they're responsible for day-to-day operations of the plan. And again, duties are set out by ERISA, which are those two brief sentences we mentioned a moment ago, the plan document and the service agreement. And I would think any 316 worth his or her salt is certainly going to have a service agreement with the plan sponsor, because the plan document might have been written 12 years ago by some outside firm. So it's not going to talk about the 316's name nor the services they provided. But whatever those day-to-day operations are, and an example would be approving distributions. That's a common, but not always, a common 316 service. Now, take a step back a moment. I said a moment ago, ERISA requires that you have to have at least one, here we call it a named fiduciary. That's under ERISA section 402. And that is in the plan document. And the Title I, Title II, that's simply the titles of ERISA. There are 4 titles, but only Title I and II, for the most part, address 401k, 403B ERISA plans. But ERISA says you have to have at least one named fiduciary, the main person. And if that person is not named specifically as an individual, like say Joe Schmo, then it's the plan sponsor, who is probably Joe Schmo. Okay. Whether there's a board of directors or whatever officers, they may also be included, but it's at least going to be Joe. Now, well, we need a plan administrator too. Well, maybe Joe's the plan administrator. If there's not an outside name 316, then Joe's the plan administrator. Did we name a corporate trustee? No. Well, then Joe's the trustee. Did we name an outside investment advisor under 321? No. Well, then Joe's, at least from a fiduciary standpoint, is the investment advisor. I realize you might have an advisor with a Series 6 or Series 7, but if they're not a 321, then Joe is in charge of the investments to one degree or to every degree. And then an investment manager, which is 338, you may be familiar, that is one where fiduciary risk is actually delegated. But Joe says, I don't want a 321. I don't want a 338, an outside party. I don't want an outside 338. I don't want an outside 403. I don't want an outside 316. Then Joe is every one of these 5 fiduciaries. And there's nothing inherently evil about that, but think of your plan clients who make widgets and ask them how much they know about these various sections of ERISA, the various sections of the Internal Revenue Code, and the marketplace in terms of services being provided. So that's why because of the more complex issues going on with participant direction, with the internet, with all these, I don't say odd investment choices, but back in the old days, we had A shares and then B shares and then C shares. Well, now we've got R1s through R6, and we have T shares and X shares and Y shares and so forth, as well as ETFs and derivatives and all these other things being marketed to retirement plans. And they're not evil. They may be appropriate for the retirement plan. But if there's no professional so designated in Joe's plan, then Joe is the one who's legally responsible for understanding what they are. Now, so we named our fiduciaries here a second ago, okay? Well, let's put them in context with one another. This is a grid that we use very often to explain to clients the differences between a 402, the named, here it's called a managing fiduciary, it could be the named fiduciary, it could be the responsible fiduciary, it could be the capital plan, capital administrator, okay? We like to use the term managing fiduciary because that's more descriptive of what a 402 does. He or she does not do the ADP testing or their daily record keeping. They manage it. Someone else does it. They manage it in the sense of overseeing it and reviewing it. Okay, so we serve as a 402 for a number of plans. Now, we also serve as some plans as just a 316. So go to the right, third from the bottom, and there you're going to see the ERISA 316. And all these green spaces that are there are very important. They serve important services to a plan sponsor. But if you're the TPA or you're the record keeper, what are you going to do for the plan sponsor, the managing fiduciary? You're going to do TPA stuff, and you're going to do record keeping stuff. Okay. If you're the investment advisor, be that a Series 6 or 7 advisor or a 321, you're going to perform those services. You're not going to get into these other lanes of other individuals. At least you shouldn't. I realize we all know investment advisors sometimes do stuff that probably are a little out of their realm, but if they do, one, they're not getting paid for it, and two, if they end up getting sued for it, their insurance won't cover them. We as fiduciaries have actually specific fiduciary insurance to cover those kinds of things. But the idea here is to explain that if Joe Schmo is our owner, he's the managing fiduciary, and he has responsibility. Here you see the yellow banners: fiduciary governance, investment oversight in the middle there, and administrative oversight. And then those broke down to either fiduciary or non-fiduciary or some combination thereof. Sometimes they're not necessary. Third from the top on the right, CPA auditor. Well, we only need a CPA auditor. You can audit a plan anytime you want as that. But of course, we only see it when the the Department of Labor requires it when you have more than 100 participants. You don't have to have an ERISA attorney. But unless there's other outside parties involved, Joe, the managing fiduciary, is going to decide when we should have an ERISA attorney. And in 316, many times 316s, which we're going to talk about here in the next slide, offer services like they approve benefit distributions. Well, we'll have the plan sponsor say, oh, my TPA does that. No, your TPA processes it, but your TPA as a non-316, as a non-fiduciary, probably doesn't sign it. They simply get whatever information they get, they make sure that their checklist is complete, and they approve or process the distribution. In my own former life as a TPA, my employer had to sign off on each one, unless they so designate as to not tell them. They typically wanted to know, but I had them sign every distribution so that they were aware that, Susie was quitting or was applying for a DOE, and we deemed that she or she was eligible, and then the plan sponsor signed off on it. Oh, before I get to the individual services, my employees, it was so funny. It didn't matter whether it was a fiduciary issue or not. They'd come in and they'd say, what about this, that, or the other thing? And I would always say, what does the document say? Whether that's a service agreement, an adoption agreement, a sales brochure, whatever it is, what the document always controls. If you lined up 10 firms all offering 316 services, and again, they may be helping or they may actually be ERISA 316. It depends on what their agreement says. If their agreement says we sign the 5500 as a service, then they're responsible for it. If they are silent or their agreement doesn't say that, then they are probably not going to sign the 5500, okay, or other things. So first, do they actually sign in their document that they are a 316? They should say that they are a ERISA 316. Number two, they are a fiduciary for some 316 services, but remain silent on those services they do not provide. Remember my example. They are a 316 for benefit distributions, but their service agreement says nothing about signing the 5500 under penalties of perjury. Okay. Now that doesn't mean they're bad. It just means that the next 316 you see, oh, they do sign the 5500. Okay. So whatever's not specifically delegated by the plan sponsor is the plan sponsor's responsibility. But then finally, number 3, a 316 contract should have the term highest standards. Okay. If I'm a fiduciary, which we are fiduciary-wise are, okay, now could we just say we're a fiduciary and show up and sign documents and never look at them and have no oversight and no we could. Obviously, I'm taking a lot of risk. But the question is, ERISA requires, and highest standards is in ERISA, as a term that's in there, that whether you're a plan sponsor fiduciary or you're an outside expert fiduciary, if you're going to qualify and protect yourself under ERISA, you must perform under highest standards. So if we get audited or we get sued, that's what they're looking at. What are our practices and procedures? What standards do we have? And if we're not providing highest standards, now we still might be, but if highest standard is not in the 316 contract, then you have to ask, why is it not in there? Because ERISA does require it. Now, for a lot of you, you may already be familiar with this. This is typically, these are the services that they provide. But again, I'm going to line up 10 316 fiduciary service firms. Some are going to do 2 of these. Some are going to do all 9 plus 10 others. Some are going to do 4 of them. It's just whatever the document says. ERISA does not stipulate that if you're a 316, you must do these 12 things. It doesn't say that. It just says the plan sponsor does everything unless it's specifically delegated to someone else, right? So it's important to a plan sponsor, especially when they're comparing price between 316A and 316B, and it'd be no different with a record keeper comparing one to the other or investment advisor. One's going to charge $1 and the other one's charging 50 cents. Well, from an abstract standpoint, they're doing the same thing. Well, we would all know, typically you get what you pay for, and price is only relevant in the absence of value. So you have to look at what they are providing. Now, here's typical objections, whether it's a named 402, because that's more expensive, got more levels of responsibility, or 316 services. This is one, the orange is the one I see or hear the most. Most investment advisors, and I say these are RIA markets, obviously, serve as a 321, or they have an affiliation. Now, again, sometimes it's with an outside firm and so forth. So they might be a broker-dealer with Principal, but they have a 321 agreement with Mesirow or somebody like that. But anyway, we already have a 321 advisor, and they come and see us every quarter. And if I ask the advisor, because I've done this, oh yeah, we keep minutes, which is good. If somebody gets sued, somebody gets audited, it's going to be for something that happened 3 years ago. I barely remember what I had for breakfast yesterday. Who's going to remember who made what decision or non-decision 3 years ago? All right, well, hey, we got a pretty good 321 guy who keeps minutes. Well, is he contractually obligated in his agreement to retain those minutes and the underlying supplemental documents that were discussed during those meetings? I have not seen one, at least in terms of a 321, that they mention anything about being responsible for keeping the minutes. That's something that a 316 or a 402 can do. Many do not. Okay, but they'll have an investment advisor who keeps minutes, and let's give them the benefit of the doubt. They do keep minutes. You think the 321 is going to oversee issues between a TPA or the CPA auditor or the plan document? Now, they might be, because they're pretty experienced, but they shouldn't be because that's not what they're getting paid to do. So even if they keep minutes, if there was some discussion about plan design issues or regulatory issues outside of what affecting investments, I doubt there's going to be much language in there. Could be, but I doubt that the 321 would want to endeavor to keep track of all that stuff. And of course, cost is too much. Again, price is only relevant in the absence of value. And so when I talk to plan sponsors, I say, hey, what do you make? Well, we make widgets. Okay, you like making a widget? Oh, yes, I make those 24 hours a day and even when I'm sleeping. Okay, how much time do you spend doing your retirement plan? Well, you start talking about it. They spend more time planning their vacation. than reviewing their retirement plan. Okay? So therefore, the question, they're not paying anything for overseeing their 401k because they aren't doing anything. So the question simply is, do you care? And if they don't care, then they don't care. You're not going to sell them anything. No different. I don't need an investment advisor because I don't see that they have any value. Oh, okay, then we're probably not going to have an investment advisor. But again, what's the value? The risk of being audited is so low as to not justify the use of these services. Or nowadays, the risk of being sued is getting higher. But if you get audited and you get sued or you get questioned seriously by an employee, now your odds are 100%. The question simply is, you have a $5 million plan. What's it worth it to you to have insurance? I don't mean that necessarily in a legal sense of an insurance policy, although again, plan sponsors should have, that's written about many times, they should have fiduciary insurance. That's different than the 10% of the assets bond. Totally different. Few, if any, plan sponsors have fiduciary insurance. The big plans clearly do, the $100 million plans and the $1 billion plans and so forth. But the plans, say, really 50 million under, I rarely see that they have insurance. But the point is, not only should they have fiduciary services, not just 316, not just 402, is not necessarily to satisfy the law. That's important. Being audited, being sued, and being protected. It's the right thing to do for your employees. And if you see out there, you guys have your own open architecture system. I did as well when I had my own TPA shop. And you see these plans with various vendors, whether they're in a group annuity or not. And this investment advisor or this platform, when they plan started with $100,000, it was a pretty reasonable fees. Well, now it's $1 million. Now it's $5 million. Costs may have gone down, but they may still proportionally be still quite high. Well, if you save, no different. You take over the record keeping and you save them $5, okay, and you only charge them $4, they just saved $1 and get better service. Okay. Finally, most of the money in the plan is mine or concentrated among only a few people. Well, if they're overpaying by 50 basis points or 25 basis points, pick a number for whatever service or whatever fund they have and so forth, and I got $500,000 or $2 million in my account and I do that for 20 years, we're actually talking some serious money here. So the idea is, I'm an owner of a company, okay? And I want to mitigate my risk, my product risk, for example, from the widgets I make. So I hire people to help me, whether that's outside accountants, outside attorneys, obviously legal documents, I incorporate, I buy insurance and so forth because I want to minimize my risk. Most plan sponsors have no clue what their risk is in their retirement plan. Now, it's $100,000 in the plan and 99 of it is mine as the owner. I probably don't have a lot of risk there. But as a plan grows, you're going to have a $12 million plan. Yes, $2 million of that's mine, but $10 million of it is my other employees. So therefore, I may still have a large account balance, but I still should be looking at doing fiduciary services. So just a couple of comments, because I know we're getting to the end here. Understand the subtle difference between capital plan administrator and little plan administrator, and ask the plan sponsor or anybody, plan advisor or whatever, who is the plan administrator. As defined in the document, they will almost always say the TPA. And the TPA is not, 99% of the time, in my experience, 100% of the time, is not the capital plan, capital administrator, unless they are also the 316. But those are two little different departments. They have two different service agreements in that example. One for the little P, one for the big P. They are the contract administrator, is actually the technical term for a TPA. And discuss the different fiduciary flavors with every employer you encounter. They've heard the term. My experience is they've heard the term. They've gone to these, maybe they're a manufacturer and they went to a manufacturer's conference and there was some discussion about risk and liability within their retirement plan, and they'll go out and get a 321, which most of you probably know is a co-fiduciary status, which really takes zero fiduciary risk off an employer. 338 actually does take off fiduciary risk, but the 321 really does nothing, which is why it's typically 1, 2, 3 basis points or less. It's very inexpensive because they aren't really doing anything. But it's important to explain the different flavors of fiduciary so that a plan sponsor can make an intelligent decision as to what to do. Now, we've spoken here for 27 minutes. And I appreciate you being on here and so forth. Here's what I would suggest that you do to get educated. because we at Fiduciary Wise feel it's very important to educate people. For the last 3 or 4 years now, we have held biweekly qualified plan fiduciary services classes. They're typically every other Wednesday. Now, they're twice a month, so sometimes we skip a week, but they're 1 hour in length. They qualify for CE. We talk about timely topics. The one we just did here a couple of weeks ago was understanding plan expenses. And again, we get into not just 12B1s, but even the turnover costs for retirement plans and so forth, but really understanding them. But also learn how other experts handle these things, because we have securities lawyers on there. We have expert witnesses that we've done in that regard. We've had, obviously, TPAs. We have a number of people that join that. And so if you really want to do that, we would encourage it. Oh, I guess I did list some of those. What co-fiduciary really means. That was a topic. Understanding plan fees. And then 11 questions to ask potential clients is something we just did last week. And by the way, we do record those, so those are available, obviously not for CE and so forth. And if you're interested in anything in terms of questions, or you'd like to learn to get an invite to our upcoming QPFS classes, you can certainly contact me at that phone number. Tom Bick, who's also head of our compliance area, he also helps me with sales as well, and that is his email address and contact information, and that is our website, so we'd certainly welcome you to do that. We're close to 3:30.
Well, thank you very much.
Questions?
Sure, yeah. I'm just going to open it up right now to everybody. We have a few minutes for a few questions. If anybody has a question or something you'd like more information about, go ahead and enter it into the questions panel now. We have a couple already. What would you expect or recommend a potential buyer to look for who's specifically seeking a 316 provider?
In any case, and this would be true for any vendor, but especially in looking at a fiduciary, one is to look at the sales information. Because again, I'm a salesperson. I want to put my best foot forward and tell in unambiguous language, at least in theory, what it is we do and what it is that we don't do. So first look at the sales material. What it is do? They help with things, or do they actually take on things? And they'll say that. Do they use, as I said earlier, do they use the term highest standards? Okay. But part of the problem in the marketplace, because 316s are so new, if you look at 10 different, just take it for instance, let's say you're going to hire 10 different actuaries to do your pension plan. Well, they've been around long enough. They're pretty common what they do. Now they use different assumptions, they have different personalities and all that other good stuff. But in the case of 316, it is so new that I have yet to see two 316 entities that are really close in terms of the things they offer. And one's not bad and one's not good. Because, for example, the one that signs the 5500 is probably going to charge more than the 316 that does not sign the 5500. So first is the sales agreement, sales document. Number two is the actual agreement, the actual sales agreement. What does it say? And what's important is what it does not say. Like, say, it doesn't talk about the 5500. Guess what? 316 is not going to sign the 5500. Okay? And maybe the client doesn't care, but most clients don't want to sign their 5500 because it says under penalties of perjury. If a fiduciary signs the 5500, then the employer doesn't even have to sign it. So if they're interested in 316, sales information, and then to the actual agreement. And if they won't share a sample agreement with you, then move on to the next one.
Great. So to jump on board with that a little more, can you shed some light on what the cost structure you generally see for these services?
Yes, the general cost. The cost is going to be a function of assets, and a function of participants. Okay, and again, part of this is if for example, I'm the 316, and only thing I'm going to do is assign 5500. Well, from 0 to 100 participants, it's my fee's probably going to be pretty much the same. I don't have to do much in terms of review. If I am signing off from a fiduciary standpoint on benefit applications, well, do we have 3 people with 1 person that leaves every 6 years? Or do we have 1,000 people in which 100 people leave every year? As a TPA, for example, I needed a casino. They had 2,000 employees. They had 28% turnover every year. lot of benefit applications to approve there, and so forth. Now, so I realize I'm not giving you a good number, but a good, it should be, if they're offering a decent amount of services, it's going to be a couple of $1,000 at least. Now, again, is this a plane with 3 people and no one ever leaves? Then the fee might be less. But if it's going to be a lot more in terms of assets, because it's going to give you more activity, again, depending upon what the 316 does. But it is obviously more of a function of the number of participants and their turnover rates, and they'll ask that kind of information. So it's more participant centered and so forth. But just to give you an idea, it shouldn't be something that's, $12.99 a month kind of a thing. It's going to be some kind of a substantial number, because when we served as a 316 in my TPA factor, there's a certain base. I mean, no different like an investment advisor, a certain amount of infrastructure you have to have, whether you have a 2 life case or a 2 million life case, and so forth. So you're probably talking at least 1,000 or 2,000 a year.
Okay, great. Thanks, Dick. That's all we have for today. As a reminder to everyone, in the next day or so, you will receive a copy of today's presentation, the handout, and a link to the recording of this session. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us.
I have one comment. I forgot to talk about my article. And by the way, and I don't know if you mentioned, I can't remember now, but I wrote an article that's going to appear in the ASPA's Plan Consultant magazine here in a couple of weeks. But it's here on the screen right there. I wrote an article, the difference between 316 and 402, just something to read. It's only about 100 or 300 words. It's just not terribly long and so forth. But if you want to download it and take a read, that'll give you, again, a better perspective of the differences of how 316 works in the marketplace.
Excellent. That will be definitely included in our follow-up materials, and we'll all keep an eye out for it for sure.
Yeah.
So we appreciate everyone's partnership, and look forward to seeing everyone on the next Epic Insight webinar. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Okay. Thank you all. Take care. Bye-bye.